All right. Happy Friday, everybody. Thank you all for joining. This is the Alteryx Server webinar series provided by Data Meaning. So, get this moving on here. So, my name, as always, is Stephen Morgan. I am part of the Data Meaning Enablement team. And we at Data Meaning kind of specialize as an end-to-end data analytics solution company. We help anything from the start of trying to get your data together, bringing it through all of the different processes, applying some business logic, and helping you get it into a clean, reportable, or usable format so that you can make informed business decisions. The enablement team is also on board with the call to help out with any questions or answers that may come up. And at the end of this session, I'm also going to be opening the floor for some QA. I specialize mostly around some standardization, some best practices, and helping people kind of take their server environment and their data solution to that next level and kind of building out a more production-focused mindset. So a lot of my emphasis is trying to make things a little bit more streamlined, automated, and efficient. I am certified with Server, Connect, as well as the Partner, Core, and Advanced certifications, and have worked with Alteryx for a little over 7 years and have been in the business intelligence data solutions, kind of predominantly more from the IT side for a little over 13 years. So moving on forward, as I mentioned, this is the Alteryx Server webinar series, and this is actually the final session of the series. So to kind of do a very brief recap, we went over the initial introduction to the server and what kind of components make up that environment, talked a little bit about how to get that to a more enterprise level, and then into some of that installation, configuration, and best practices around how to manage an Alteryx server. And last week, I covered the user side experience from the Alteryx Gallery. So a lot of what I covered last week is also going to tie in very heavily this session, where I'm going over the administrative side of the Alteryx Gallery environment. So just like before, any of our webinars are being recorded, and you can find that available on the webinar page itself or at the Data Meaning YouTube page, where we're going to be listing everything there in the full series so that you have that available to continuously look into. So as we move into the final session in this overview, I did actually want to take a moment to kind of address something that came up at the end of last session with a question. So there was a question brought up regarding collections and some of the new things that are coming out from Alteryx. So as of last week, Alteryx has made an official statement that they are going to start moving away from team private studios and having private studios exist, and instead making workflows available based off of user. They are encouraging everyone to start looking towards using collections and that security piece in order to better collaborate and share workflows. Now, as to some of the deeper details into it, that's still being kind of discussed between partners, the Alteryx reps themselves, and just as more information becomes available, this is something that we'll be kind of letting people know. That having been said, again, please feel free to reach out to myself, the enablement team, or the sales team here at Data Meaning, and we can try to help you in any way possible. But moving forward, this is going to be the focused mindset that Alteryx is going to be taking. That having been said, I wanted to add that caveat so that I can emphasize that what we'll be covering today is as of the Alteryx Server version 2019.4. So the whole concept of private studios going away is something for the future. I am still going to be talking in some degree about the private studios and how to configure those. So going over very briefly for our agenda, I'm going to do a very quick overview of how to access the administrative segment, as well as something that I touched on very briefly last session, and that's the profile settings. Following that, we're going to do a walkthrough of the administrative side, and I'm going to go into some detail about how you can configure and set this up to help you get the most out of your environment. So right off the bat, from the regular gallery page, from the user side, you have in the top right area here, that whole area where I was talking before, where we've got links, notifications, and some information here related to you as a user. Well, when you click on that, assuming you have curator privileges, which is that admin role, you will have a link to the admin section here. And when you select that, that will take you over to the landing page, which is a diagnostics page. But before that, I'm going to go ahead and move us into this profile instead. So from the profile page, you have a bunch of different information that is going to be relevant, both from a user perspective and from an admin perspective. So the first major one, and some of this can be changed on the user configurations inside of the admin page, and I'll show that. But from a profile page, you have some information here, the name, your email, time zone, but you also have some permissions and showing you what you have the means to do. This is privately tied to you. So for me in particular, I can schedule jobs, prioritize, assign jobs to different worker nodes, and I have the capability to create collections. So you do have the means on the admin side to customize this. The next little area is going to go into this private studio tab, where the name of the private studio would be listed up here, but then you have some contact information as to who is in charge of the owner of that private studio. And you also have a listing of members and artisans that have access to that private studio. If you remember from last session, I showed the sales private studio where we had 5 different artisans in there, and we had 5 slots for members, which if you do have availability into it, the owner of that private studio can add different members into it that get a read-only or run-only access to what goes into that private studio. Moving a little bit further, you have a tab for notifications, which is self-explanatory. Again, these are automated emails that the workflow server will send to you based on what comes up. And now moving a little bit further, this goes into something a little bit more involved. Apologies. And that would be the keys for your private studio as well as the admin API. Now, the Alteryx server has a backend API that allows you to trigger workflows to run, to schedule them to a queue, or access different portions of the Alteryx Gallery. And when you are working with other workflows that are chaining off of one another, or you may have other environments or a third-party program that needs to leverage some of what is inside the Alteryx server, but you want to do it through proper means as opposed to maybe a hard-coded solution, you can leverage some of these API keys and get a lot of benefit. So the subscription key is that private studio. The admin API key, and the secret key that is listed here is what will authenticate you and give you the means to do some of your admin control through an API rather than needing to rely on going through any of these interfaces. And lastly, we have the versioning, which the nice thing here is it will show the current version you were using installed on your environment and the versioning of the server. This is great if you wanted to look and get at a quick snapshot, what is your discrepancy in terms of versioning? And this becomes very important when you are talking about upgrades. Anytime you do an upgrade to the server environment, you need to make sure the new versions are coming along with it on your designer, and vice versa. So if you do have version discrepancies, that may lead to some issues of workflows not running properly. So again, this is more available on the user side, but it is very relevant for a lot of the things you can use inside the admin side as well. So kind of moving on forward, we're going to go into that admin section and now go into a walkthrough here. So our first area is the landing page, or that diagnostic page from the get-go. And this gives you some cursory information. So right off the bat, you can see how many workflows are loaded on your environment. You have a total of 42 in this case, and you have a total of 18 made publicly available. Now you can also see the amount of users, and the way Alteryx is designed is you don't necessarily delete things so much as you disable them in terms of users and the workflows tied to them. So you can also get a quick count of what is disabled. Moving in, we've got our collections, how many workflows are stored amongst these collections, and how many different users have access to the collections. Now, if you notice, we've got 12 users and 20 users here in collections. What that's referring to is the amount of users within each collection totaled. So if I belong to 2 collections, I get counted twice in here. So be mindful of that. Here you have a list of your private studios, any shared credentials, any scheduled workflows, anything running on the system right now, and any data connections that are available to be shared. And I'm going to be touching in a lot of this as we start going through this. You also have a display for any of your worker nodes, how much CPU and memory is currently being used, and you can look through different tags and explore any of the worker nodes that may be on your list. In our environment, we just have the 1 worker node, but in a more robust environment, you may have multiple, and you can look through and see at different times and intervals whether it's your CPU or your memory spiking based on certain things that are running. So it's a very nice, quick visual as to how does my server look and is there anything I need to immediately address. So in order to better accommodate a good walkthrough, I'm going to be jumping around a little bit and trying to group similar things together. So the next area that I'm going to cover is first the permissions. Now, that being said, the permissions are only available if you are using Active Directory for your Alteryx environment. If you're using a standard login and permissions, you are only going to have the user segment to govern some of your permissions for any user that comes in. So the first things that I like to cover with the permissions is that default permission. I'll go ahead and expand that. If you were to click into this, you have something listing that says that no access, viewer, artisan, or curator. What this means is unless someone is specified down here to have different permissions, what it will do is someone logging into the Alteryx Gallery for the first time will have whatever is set as the default. In this case, no access. But if you wanted anyone to access it publicly, you can give them viewer. And then I don't recommend using artisan or curator for obvious reasons, but that is based on your environment and what works best. The idea is you can set a blanket permission that anybody that's not been specified logs in and authenticates a certain way. Moving in a little bit further, you can always go in and select a particular user and alter their permissions. So in this case, Andrew Kim is listed out as a curator. We could go in and alter that to an artisan, a viewer, anything that we see fit. And then lastly, you have the ability to go up and search and add or edit permissions. So if we were to go and type in sales, for example, what it will do is it will look through the Data Meaning Active Directory and it will find anything that finds a match. So we've got 2 Active Directory groups here, our sales agents and our sales group. So if I was to select this, it would then prompt me with those same permissions that I just showed, and I can designate something specific for them. So one of the things that I've seen and recommended a lot of clients do, is set Active Directory groups based on their permissions. They may have an AD group that is dedicated to viewers, an AD group dedicated to your artisans and your curators. And that gives you a little bit more default granularity, because then you can just simply load in each group, have maybe just a couple here as the different permissions, and then when they log in, they're already part of that Active Directory group. They get their permissions, they're good to go. Now, once somebody has logged in for the first time and they have connected into your environment, they will become available on the user side. And what this is it's going to list the name, their domain connection, and it will list out the private studio that they're part of. So in this case, if we look over at Katie Jackson, she's part of the sales team and belongs to that bigger private studio that I'd mentioned. So then you have the ability to always filter and search, just like you do in most of what's in the Alteryx side. You can also select this user and it will load up a page to kind of give you some more granular information. So again, first name, last name, we've got our network, our domain connection here, an email, any other supplemental information, and we also have the private studio's key that they belong to. Again, this is very useful for API. We also can set or change different permissions, and these were kind of what I covered in that profile area. And then lastly, you can always manually reset a password, and that's only relevant if you are not using Active Directory. So now that we kind of covered the user side, each user belongs to one private studio. So subscriptions is another term by which Alteryx states private studio. And in here, we've got a couple different private studios. So I'm going to refer to mine right here. So you can see Stephen Morgan, or Stephen.Morgan is the name of my private studio. I am the member of it, and I only have one seat available. Now, I had mentioned that the sales team shares a private studio. So here we have sales team, and inside of it, Josh Jackson is listed as the owner of this private studio, but we are using 4 out of 5 seats for this. So clicking in, you can look into the subscription and see a little bit more comprehensive information. So again, you have the name of the private studio, the primary contact, and some different bits of information here. Now, under subscription type, you have listed free or paid. I would like to add in the caveat here that there is no additional cost for the Alteryx server. When you have the server and you have the license for it, that's it. You don't need a license per user within the Alteryx environment. However, if you were to go and set the subscription type to free, it would enforce and require you to include an expiration date for people's access within this private studio. So that's good if you have a private studio that was dedicated to contractors, for example. Now, moving a little bit further, you can see how we have a list of artisan seats and member passes. And we have actually been adding in some of our sales team as artisans within this private studio. You can also, from the profile side, so Josh could go in and designate members, which get a read or run only access to what gets loaded into this private studio. Then lastly, you can assign specific worker node. So again, in the case of a data science team, you could say, hey, this uses the data science worker node by default, and you can enable API or shared scheduling, which allows Josh to schedule something and then Katie to be able to view what got scheduled. We can also set default workflow credentials, which I'll touch in a moment. And you can see the private studio's subscription key, which is good, again, for API connections. So, a lot of good information inside here. And again, I wanted to point out that this is as of 2019.4's version. Future versions of the Alteryx server environment is going to be moving away from this mindset and focusing more towards individual users having their own workflows and then sharing them within collections, which makes a good segue to the next area I want to go into, collections themselves. Now, from the user side that we went over last week, I showed you that I had access to 4 collections. As you can see here, there are actually 7 in our environment. And when you go in as an admin, you can see all the collections, the owners, when it was created, and some different counts related to some of the information. When you click into one of these collections, you will get something that loads up very similar to the user side. And in a similar fashion, you can go through, look at the workflows that are coming in. You can go to Insights, Users, and Private Studios. As an admin, you can actually go to the user side and add in users as well. So a little bit of a manual process, but if a collection got created and you are part of an admin group, like an IT admin team, you can add your own private or your own group to it so that they have access. Now, I would say as a best practice, it's better to have that be included when the collection gets created, but you do still have an option regardless. So you do have means to help reconcile and help support teams as they start working throughout their collections and building their workflows together. The next area is a little bit more visual, and this is the districts section. So right off the bat, if you remember when I covered districts, we had all of these districts here made available. And whenever you create a district, you simply have an on and off switch for it. Now, when you go in to add a new district, you're going to get something that is a little bit more visual for how you can build this. So first thing is it's going to ask you enter in a title. When you enter this in, it will already create a hyperlink, and it requires for you to connect up to a tag. Now, when we get into the workflow segment, I'm going to show you how to create a tag, but essentially for a district, you have to have a tag associated to it because that is how it organizes and sets public workflows in a particular district. And this nice thing to it is a workflow can belong to multiple districts at a time. So don't feel like you have to have all of your tags so sharply defined. You can be more general with it if you need to. You can write a small excerpt about the district, and you can put in a full description with some formatting to text, as you can see here. Now, kind of moving a bit further, we're going to go into the workflows themselves. Now, as you can see, you get visibility to all of the different workflows in the environment. And this is very nice if you're trying to figure out who has what workflow or who is the ownership of that particular workflow. So the first thing I want to cover is this setting. Enable workflows to be marked as ready for migration to a separate environment. Now, keep in mind, this is purely just a means to flag workflows for migration. This does not do a migration itself. And in the previous session, I kind of showed you under workflow settings where you can go to configure that. Also on this side, you have the ability to filter your private or public workflows, filter down based on any sort of information, and you can always go to that list view if you don't want to use this tile view here. Now, when you click in on a workflow from this side, you're going to get a screen that comes up. It looks very similar to this. So if you notice, it's got some good information. The name of the workflow, it states who uploaded it, which private studio is tied to this workflow, how many times it ran manually. You can add tags right here as an admin, which is very useful if you are working with admin only tags. And you have some other information. But if you notice, you can't change a lot. The first major thing is you can't run or download this workflow. And that is because the Alteryx environment is blocking an admin from being able to access something that they may not necessarily have access to. So again, let's say someone is building a workflow for finance and it has confidential information, whereas an IT admin may need to help maintain or schedule or keep this workflow running. They are not privy to the information inside of it or the output that comes from it. This is a means of having that separation. If you want an admin to be able to access and manipulate the workflow, then you want them to have access within a collection and have it shared with them. Again, that's kind of where that Active Directory group came from. So some of the things you can change though, you can alter the description of the workflow. You can restrict the run mode, of which there are 3 different types of restrictions for the run mode. You have unrestricted, which is the default, semi-safe, which prohibits the workflow from being able to trigger other workflows or access something outside of that workflow. And then you have what is called safe, which will prohibit the workflow from being able to access any type of shared drive, network area, or anything that is not physically on the server machine. In 99% of the cases, you're going to want to run in unrestricted, but you do have means to really tightly lock down something if you had to. The worker assignment, again, you can assign a worker node to specifically run this workflow, and you can do some flagging here. You can say that private data is required for this workflow. You can request that any private data gets excluded. Now, granted, you have to designate inside of the workflow what is and is not private. You can make the workflow public. And then lastly, you can flag the workflow so that it can be migrated. So you've got a little bit of information. And from the admin side, you can delete a workflow. That being said, it does not truly delete the workflow as it still exists within some of the back environment and the MongoDB. So you do have a means to recover it, but I do recommend against doing that. It is better to move workflows and kind of decommission them than to delete it, because you do lose some of that history, you lose some of the other components that go into it. And then lastly, you can always go in, select, and save your workflow. So what this does is this will make the change and kind of save everything there. So that kind of covers what is on the top portion of the workflows. The next area I want to talk to is down here with the tags specifically. So tags are very straightforward. The nice thing that you can do is you can go in, simply type in a tag, hit add new tag, and voila, it is now available. And I kind of showed you an example of this from the user side when we were adding tags. Some of the other things you can do though is you can type in a tag and check admin only. What this will do is put the little check mark right here next to that tag, and only an admin, a curator, has the means to add a production tag to a workflow. Anyone that is an artisan can see the tag, can see that it exists, but they do not have the capability to add it. And this is good if you want to build a best practice around how to organize or to kind of set a more formal process for your production environment. So moving on into the next area, and this is a major area. And when it comes to talking about the Alteryx server environment, there's normally 3 major pieces that make up the usage of a server. That collaboration piece, which we've kind of already covered, and now we're moving into something a little bit more in depth and a little bit more comprehensive, and that is your data connections, and then following after, your credentials. So data connections, as the name would imply, allow you to build and share gallery level connections to your data sources. Now, as you can see here, we have a couple different ones here. A SQL one, a MySQL, and a separate SQL connection. We've got a connection string, which the big thing I want to point out here is it does show some information, but it also hashes out any passwords. So it prevents and encrypts any of the stuff that gets listed here so that someone can't just look at this and just copy paste it and be good to go. It blocks any means of connecting to it outside of being shared this properly. Now, some of the things that come up with this, you can go in and select add a new data collection, and it will pop up a little window. So something similar to this, where you can select your type of connection. Now, by default, there's already some built-in functionality for SQL and Oracle connections. And then you have an open source area to write in a connection string. So to give you some visibility, from the SQL side, you can go in, you've got your name, your host, you can pick your authentication, you can test your connection, pick a database type, and you can dig down a little bit deeper here. Some of the other things is from your Oracle, you've got your service name, your port, again, authentication and testing, and you can put in a connection name and just a full-on connection string for many of the other data connections or sources that you want to share. Once you have put in the information, it will just simply add a new connection right down here, and you can then go in and edit this connection. And what this will show you, first off, is that name of the connection and your connection string. Now, I did not go all the way through it, but again, it encrypts that password again. So if you were to go in and put in a password here and hit save, the next time you access this page, it's encrypted again. So it is secure and it locks things down so nobody can go in and just start looking at stuff. And the other big thing is for this data connection, again, only curators, your admins, have the means to look at this and actually manipulate this. The other area is the users and studios section. And this is where you can take your data connections that you've created and share them. So you may have a particular team or a private studio. So in our example, we've got the sales team that need access to the SQL environment, and you can go type in the private studio or particular users like Andrew Kim, for example, and share this connection with them. Now, what this does is it gives them access through their development as part of their input tools to be able to leverage that connection. It will go in, it will access it through whatever you specify in the data connections area, and it will allow them to retrieve their data. This is a very good way to handle and control connections to certain locations. One of the major things that I've seen people do is they may build separate connections for separate teams. So you may have a finance department and then you have, let's say, a sales team, both of which may need to access the same environment, but different portions or different levels of data. Leverage the security within your database environment. And your finance group may have access to more tables or a different schema than your sales team would. And you can leverage that and just simply write your connection strings here and share them accordingly. This is a very good way to lock down who gets access to what data and who should have access to what data. And again, all of this is fully audited within the logging system. So this is a very strong piece to the Alteryx server. And it's something that I recommend in setting up your environment as part of your best practices. Think through what level of gallery data connections you need, because you set them in one place and then share that to all of your users that need it. And they're not building their own connections anymore. They're working out of your governance, out of what you've set up as a standard. Following a very similar vein, we're going to move into the credentials. Now, the workflow credentials are very interesting. And we touched a bit on this when I was talking about configuring your Alteryx server and some of the different things that you can add to it. The major thing with a credential is when a workflow is ran, it will be ran as if it is authenticated as a particular user or service account. What that means is any level of access regarding that account being used is what it will use. So if you have access to a shared drive, but you tell it to run under a different user that may not have access to that shared drive, it will prevent that workflow from running correctly. So the first setting here is you can set a default setting. Now, I want to add the caveat here, and they put it in the little highlight here. Warning, changing the credentials may impact existing workflows from running. And the reason why this is you're changing the credentials of your entire workflow or your entire server. So by default, you have three different options. You can use default credentials, which essentially means whatever you've specified in the backend on the server installation and configuration is what it will use. You can select require user credentials, which means that it will force the users that run the workflow to use their own credentials to run a workflow. Or you can allow users to select the credentials option. And what this gives you that freedom to is when someone develops and builds out a workflow and publishes it, they have the ability to then go in and select and say, I want whoever runs this workflow to use my permissions and access here. Or I want them to use their own because this workflow is built to look at my own private folder. So if they ran it, I want it to look at their private folder. Or lastly, you can go and say, I want it to use a specific account that I've designated, whether that is a service account or maybe the account of like a team lead that has shared their credentials within their team because they have all of the permissions and connections needed to run the workflow. So very powerful setting, but if you make the change in this area right here, it will impact every workflow that is in the environment. And that's why they put that warning there. So moving a little bit further, you have the means to actually just build out credentials. So simple little thing, when you hit add new credentials, you put in your domain login and your password and simply save it. Now, once it's saved, you can go in and edit it. So similar to the data connections, you can go in here to the general information tab. It has my username and my password is hashed. So again, I just entered it in, it is already hashed and I can't do anything to uncover it. I can type a new one in, hit save, and it will hash it again. So again, it's secure, it's preventing anyone from having any type of access to it they should. You can then select the users and studios section, and it will give you some more comprehensive connection here. So in this case, I have my login credentials, which means if I run a workflow, it's using my login, my access to shared drives and stuff like that. And I am sharing this, and you can share it with a private studio as well, but I'm sharing it with Andrew Kim, which means when he goes and runs a workflow, he has the option to either run it as himself, or he can go and select a shared credential, so my credentials that I provided him, and run that. So that would be useful if I have access to something he doesn't, but he's running my workflow so that he can get something accomplished. Now, the big thing to note with this is fully auditable, and there is a level of security that comes with it. Again, Andrew can run a workflow as if he was me, using my connection component. But it does not mean that he can access freely anything that I can. So just because I can access a shared drive and a folder does not mean that he can access that shared drive and folder. It just means that he can run a workflow that does have access. And that is fully audited when it says Andrew Kim is running a workflow. The credentials passed over is Stephen Morgan's credentials that have been shared to Andrew Kim as per configuration. The workflow runs as me, completes, and then provides that end information back over to Andrew. You can follow it step by step. At no point in time does it allow Andrew to open up his Windows Explorer and go to that shared drive. So this is a very good way to lock down certain connections and certain pieces. So again, the collaboration piece is a major cornerstone of the server environment, but the data connections and the data and the workflow credentials make up that other segment to it. And it helps you get some standardization and governance to your environment. So moving a little bit further, going into the jobs area. Now the jobs section, first off, shows any workflows that are currently running on your environment. Given that we're not taxing our system too hard, we don't have any running. But if you are running a lot of workflows, you can see the names, what priority, if it's tied to a worker, when was it scheduled, the state that it's in, and all sorts of good relevant information. You also can designate a means to enable users to schedule workflows. If this is disabled, nobody can schedule a workflow, which may be part of a best practice if you want IT to be the only ones that could. You would set this to no, and then after you've went through your quality assurance process, your UAT, the admin would go in, hit yes, schedule the workflow, turn that back to no, and lock it back down again. Now, the next little area is the workflows that have been scheduled. So I had shown you that I had my two workflows down here. I had the Python one that was disabled, and I have my scheduled workflow. But as an admin, I can see everything that is scheduled. I can see what priority it is running at. I can see any worker node assigned to it, the frequency, when it was created, every bit of information. And I can also edit and change scheduled workflows. So I can go in here and re-enable or disable these as I see fit. This is very good for an admin to use if you're trying to coordinate your scheduling. The last little area is talking about migration. So any workflow that has been flagged as ready to migrate, you can go into here and you can select multiple workflows and their schedules and put in a new user and migrate it over. And this is useful if you are moving schedules of workflows over to somebody. What it does not do, however, is it does not move the workflows themselves to a different user. It only moves the schedules and the ability to control and access those schedules. So keep that in mind. If you're wanting to migrate a workflow to a new user, you will need to go through a little bit more of a comprehensive process, and that's kind of where the API and things like that come into play. So I am not going to cover that here, but I wanted to mention specifically that this is regarding scheduled workflows, not the physical workflows themselves. Moving a little bit further, you have an area where you can store and upload media, which for this example, I just have our Data Meaning logo. You can see some information, give it a title, but when you go to upload, you can load in videos, you can load in all sorts of stuff. So if you wanted to build in help tutorials, or maybe even take the videos from this webinar series and load them up so you have them for reference, you can. Just keep in mind that just like any other type of media, it does take up space and you do need to make sure you have some storage for it. The next area is talking about the theming. And I actually find this to be one of the funner things that you can do from that configuration piece. And this is where you can go in and you can designate the name of the gallery. So in our case, Data Meaning Gallery. You can put in a logo, as you can see up here. You can set your colorations, your brand standards. You can do a lot of really nice things here. So For me, I like things to look visual. I like things to be very clean and obvious to the user as to what they're accessing. So it may be in your best interest to get a hold of maybe the marketing and sales group or whomever is in charge of your brand standards and get an idea of what colors are being used, what different things are being applied, so that when you build out your Alteryx Gallery, you set your theming up to match that. Nothing is worse than a user going from one site, so let's say Salesforce, for example, and then over to Alteryx, and it looks so radically different that they then have to question if they're accessing something in their own company. So making use of theming is something very simple and straightforward, but it does have an impact on the user experience. Continuing on, you have the ability to create pages and links. And this is a cool little feature that I don't think gets used often enough. So from the admin side, you can add a new page, and you always have the ability to filter and sort and do what you need to. And you can create a brand new article of a document. So for example, you can come up with something that looks like this. And what it'll do is it will load up, shows the name of the author, you can give it a title, it creates a hyperlink, which you can always copy paste somewhere. You can put in an excerpt, determine whether it's published or a draft, and you can write information in here. Now, the important thing about this is documentation. You can store all sorts of great information or other locations or other things that may be viable for a user to have. And then you can take it a step further and actually create some hyperlinks to this. So you can go in and you can either designate an existing page, or you can put in a URL here and put in a title and hit add new link. Now, if you remember at the very beginning of this session and the mid part of the last session, where I said you had the username up here and you had your notifications, you had this other area that was a link. When you click on that, all of these become available that you can just simply navigate to. So what I've seen in the past is people may put a link to their SharePoint page, or they may make pages or articles focused around data connections or certain governance policies. Different things like that just help you get more information out in a little bit more of a streamlined fashion. Then the last area that I want to cover is the notifications. Now, this is something that is not as useful as it would initially appear. However, there are some benefits to it. The first major one is that system message. You can type in a message and any user that logs in, both to the user and admin side, will get something that pops up at the top of their screen and basically says whatever you have here. So this is good if you wanted to go and say, okay, we're going to be doing an upgrade and we have a scheduled downtime from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., for example. You can list that out and every user that logs onto the server will see that. So it's very useful for a good, easy system notification. Then you can go a little bit further and you can select one of these emails here. And what this is it gives you a pre-rendered automated email format by which you can make some customization and say, okay, here's the subject line, here's any of the verbiage that come to this, and you can specify any group that you want to send this to. And what this does is when the event occurs, when it triggers, so in this case, let's say someone was a member of a studio and their membership expired, it will now send a pre-formatted email to that person to let them know that, hey, their access expired. The last little area down at the bottom here is where you can set up an email group and you can designate what you want people to connect with. So you can go in and say, okay, I want these 6, so these 6 of email events to go to whatever I set up as this email group, and I want it active. Now, this is me personally from an admin side. While these notifications are useful, I, as an admin, am far more interested in whether or not my workflows load, and if they don't run properly, what needs to happen to them. In order to address that, you want to, as best practices, start implementing email tools and different things inside your workflows directly. And you can connect up the SMTP and have it send it out. But for me, that is the type of notification I prefer to see from an admin side. These are all nice, but again, they are tied specifically to the gallery, not necessarily the workflows themselves or how they operate. So something to be mindful of. And this is why I don't think the notifications go far enough from an administrative component to really help support that production environment. So this kind of covers what we are going over throughout the Alteryx Server series. I wanted to open the floor for QA in just a moment, but I wanted to thank everybody for attending. I know there's been a lot of information kind of shared this past month, and I hope there were pieces of it that helped and benefited you in some way. And as always, if there are any questions, please feel free to ask. We can address those now in the Q&A. And if there are any things that come up, please feel free to reach out to myself or our sales team. And we've actually now created an enablement team email as well. And we're more than happy to help answer any questions and support you in any way that we can. From the Alteryx webinar series itself, again, that is available on this webinar page, and it is available on our Data Meaning YouTube page as well. Please feel free to review it, to look over it. And again, if you have questions, by all means ask it. I'm more than happy to help. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and check the Q&A a bit. So, this is a good one. If you have an employee that leaves the company unexpectedly, is there a way as an admin to view or download his or her workflows? So yes, there's an easy way and a slightly more convoluted way. So you can always view the workflows from the admin side. However, those workflows are tied to that particular private studio. What you would need to do is take a user or your own account, give yourself access to that private studio, take those workflows, and then download them and republish them within a different private studio or a different location. That's the current most optimal solution. That having been said, in the newer versions of the Alteryx environment, with private studios going away and everything being pushed more to collections, there may be new things being included that help you migrate that much easier. Because at that point, it's tied to a user and you can simply say, hey, I just want to assign a new owner for this workflow and move on with my day. So I can't vouch for what Alteryx is intending to do in the future, but I believe that's their thought process and removing the need to access the private studio first. But it does give you the means to access it, to pull in those workflows if you need to, and then republish them. Any other questions coming in or any other things in the chat? So let me pop that open. I see somebody copied one of the keys. Yeah, those keys are very extensive. And generally, when you start working with those, especially once you have the API admin keys put in place, you normally build a process around it, whether that's another workflow that is using the API, or you may use like a third-party program that is accessing the Alteryx server, configuring the API so that it can connect on the different keys, and then scheduling workflows or adding them to a queue to process. So yeah, I definitely don't recommend typing that by hand. But any other questions or anything that comes up? Please, by all means, if you have a question or anything that you're not certain on, I'm more than happy to answer or help any way I can. Can the same user be a viewer for some collections and a member for other collections? Yes. So that's actually a very good question. The nice thing is, while you can only belong to one private studio at a time, you can belong to any number of collections at any level of access or control to it. So all they have to do is basically give you access into that collection and set your permissions a certain way. So a good example would be the 4 collections that I had on the user side, where I am the owner of 3 of those collections, but I am also an admin in the 4th one. So you can set permissions based accordingly, and you may have someone that is part of an internal audit team that needs access into finance, but not necessarily a means to do anything else in it beyond just knowing these workflows exist and potentially have the means to run them. So you can be an admin or an artisan level type of user within your auditing collection, but then the finance collection, you just simply have the means to see. Okay, any other questions or thoughts that have come up? Give people just a moment. Okay, well, I guess I'll be ending this a little bit early and give you guys back just a few minutes of time. Again, I wanted to thank everybody for taking the time to attend the webinar series, and I hope this has provided something very useful for you and to kind of help give a little bit more clarity as to what the Alteryx Server product is and what it can enable you to do and how to take part in it. It's a very robust and strong product that when you get from that stage of that manual running and processing and you want to start building a more production focused automation and streamlined process, Server is that next step, and it is a very monumental benefit to any environment that starts incorporating it. It honestly changes the way that you can operate within Alteryx. So again, thank you everybody for taking the time out, and I hope you guys have a good weekend. Oh, no, I'm glad to help, Noah. All right, everybody, have a good one.